Welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. I'm your host, Ariane Sommer, and in this episode, we're stepping into one of the most intimate intersections of modern life, where love meets technology. My guest today is Dr. Liesel Sharabi, a leading researcher at Arizona State University and director of the Relationships and Technology Lab. Her work dives deep into how digital tools from dating apps to virtual reality are reshaping not only how we meet, but how we connect, how we build intimacy, and how we sustain relationships in a rapidly changing world. We explore the future of romantic connection, how algorithms and AI companions are influencing attraction. What happens when the first dates take place in virtual reality? And how the seemingly infinite choices on dating apps can sometimes leave us lonelier than before. We also touch on the deeper threads, the psychological impact of swipe culture, the ethical tensions of love in a commodified system, and whether technology is bringing us closer or quietly rewriting what it means to relate. If you've ever wondered how digital culture is shaping the soul of human connection, this conversation is for you.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Dr. Sharabi, welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. I am really intrigued by your work and very excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here.
Your work is really on the cutting edge of the evolution of our society, of how we communicate, how we interact with each other. And as our world is becoming increasingly digitized with virtual and augmented reality breaking barriers in social interactions, your research into VR first dates is fascinating. For me, the idea of experiencing a first date through VR, where physical presence is substituted by digital avatars, that pushes the boundaries of what we consider traditional relationship building. And yeah, it's fascinating and it's futuristic, but it's not. It's now, pretty much. How do you see VR dating evolving and what's happening in that field? And also, what are potential pros and cons of dating in virtual reality environments? So many
Yeah.
questions, but yeah.
Yeah, so this is very much still in the future. And so a lot of the research that my lab has been doing looking at virtual reality dating has involved students on our campus around the Phoenix area. And it's been really interesting to me how so many of them have never interacted with somebody in VR before. So maybe they've used Oculus headsets, maybe they use it for gaming, but they're not using it for social interaction. And so I think when we talk about VR dating, it's still a ways away. I think the technology is still really new to a lot of people. And I always use my students as a gauge of where we're at because they tend to be the early adopters, right? So if they're not doing it, that you're really on the forefront of something. But I also think there's a lot of possibility there. And so one of the big advantages with VR is that it engages the senses, right? So when you think about a relationship, and all of the things involved in that. It's about touch, it's about hearing somebody's voice, it's about all of these things that are currently missing when you interact with somebody on your phone or even via Zoom. And so VR offers the potential to reintroduce some of those cues to potentially provide a richer experience when you're interacting with a romantic partner. And it also puts you in the same place, right? So you are no longer at a distance. You're now back together again, similar to how you would be if you were interacting in person. But it also opens up the door for all kinds of possibilities of what that space looks like. So you can have a first date on Mars. You can go scuba diving with someone. You can do all of these things that are just only right now existing in our imaginations. And so I think for those reasons, VR has some really exciting possibilities associated with it when we think about how we meet and get to know romantic partners.
And I saw actually on your site, Dr. Sharabi, that you can sign up for this to have a date if you have a partner. And I was like, I should maybe sign up with my husband. How fun would be that? Would that be?
Yeah, it's a really great date night for couples. Right now, we're doing a study where we're recruiting couples to go through a VR experience together, and they have a lot of fun with it. And again, for a lot of them, it's something that they've never done before. And so I think that novelty element too adds some appeal for people.
Yes. And what you mentioned, of course, with you could have a date on Mars, you could go scuba diving. The brain doesn't really know the difference, to say it flippantly, between a quote real experience and one that is virtual, or even in meditation, or if with your intentions. A lot of athletes work in that way, preparing themselves for actual real life competitions. Soldiers get prepared in that way. So I find there's a really interesting neuroscience aspect to this whole experience as well. Do you have any data on what's happening in the brain as we're having these experiences in the VR?
Yeah, that's not the kind of work that I'm doing currently, but I can say, in terms of thinking of it as a training environment, I think when it comes to relationships, that's another really great potential use of virtual reality. So, say you're someone that kind of struggles with dating and you never really know what to say on a first date. You don't really know, you have a hard time communicating. Maybe in VR, you can work with a coach, you can have a simulated dating experience. This is research that we've also done in my lab where we've sent people into VR with a dating coach and someone who can actually go invisible during those first date interactions, where they're able to whisper into your ear tips, they're able to provide some guidance, and they're not visible to the people in the interaction. And so you're able to get that coaching in a very different way than you would be able to face. So then you can play around with different strategies, different techniques, and essentially improve your communication skills in a way that will hopefully then follow you when you leave the VR environment. And then you're an avatar. So for a lot of people, that's more comfortable because there is that certain amount of anonymity associated with it. And so I think that's another potential use of VR that is worth exploring. There's a lot of possibility there.
Yes, and that's a really interesting idea you just brought up, Dr. Sharabi, to basically have your dating coach or matchmaker, because typically, traditionally, matchmakers will prep you before and then debrief you after. So if that person could actually be in the room with you and oversee and gently guide, I think that would be advantageous for a lot of people who just tend to have social anxiety, or they're just not that experienced, and they might be wonderful human beings. They just do not know how to communicate that, and that way may miss out on beautiful relationships. I'm curious, Dr. Sharabi. So you mentioned before we can have the sense, our senses can get involved, touch, maybe even scent, of course, the audio. What implications do these technologies have on emotional intimacy? And how may they reshape our understanding of presence and connection in the digital age?
Yeah. Virtual reality is all about presence and making it really feel like you are physically present with someone, you are socially present with that person, like you are sharing the same space. And so I think that there are opportunities for connection there. I especially think of people who are in long distance relationships that are trying to maintain that relationship with the tools they have available currently. And I think to achieve that real sense of presence, it's difficult sometimes when you are texting or even when you're on Zoom or you're on the phone. There's still that barrier in that sense that I know that we're far apart right now, and that can be a barrier in the relationship. And I think in those instances as well, VR could be a really useful tool for people. And we saw this during the pandemic when people were at home, they weren't able to see loved ones as much, and people started to use VR to connect. I've heard stories of people that would fall asleep in VR environments with headsets on because they wanted to be with a romantic partner and feel like they were having the experience of falling asleep together. That's something that's very difficult to do with some of the technologies that we have currently. And so those little things, it seems like it's a little thing, but when you think about relationships where you're not able to see someone all the time, it's those little things that you miss too. Those just day-to-day mundane moments.
For sure. In a sense, it may be even an extension of a more immersive, even extension of somebody who wishes to convey their affection for you. They're not there. and they send you some beautiful flowers, right? So it's via VR, we can actually have that connection in a different way. This also brings up the thought, of course, of we could call it sex, love, and machines. And you also have explored the idea that relationships in the future could be more than human. How do you envision technologies like AI companions or robots integrating into our love lives? And that absolutely fascinates me. I'm watching on social media also all these ads, particularly on TikTok for what is it, MeChat and others for these, AI companions, and they seem to be very successful.
Yeah, so this is something else. Replica is a really big
Mhm.
one too. People forming relationships with AI, I think, has been a really hot topic lately. And this can happen in VR environments too, right? So you have an embodied form of AI that you can interact with, along with interacting with another human being that's representing themselves in avatar form. And so I think that this is another area where we're probably going to see a lot more of these kinds of relationships in the future. And I think the big question is, there are a lot of big ethical questions that come up with this, right? So, in what situations do we push people towards AI relationships if, say, they're lonely, if they're needing companionship and they've had trouble connecting with people? And then in what situations do we say, okay, let's teach you skills to help you form human to human connection versus turning to AI? And so I think that's something that we're going to have to sort out. I think that people who already have some pre-existing vulnerabilities are going to be the ones that are especially likely to turn to AI for companionship. And these are things that I think we'll have to think about moving forward.
For sure. And I think many people, it'll just be an augmentation of their life. I heard this one young woman talk about in a reel. She's just, yeah, this is just what I do to de-stress after I had a long work day. I just get on there with my AI companion and for half an hour, 40 minutes, and it's like a glass of wine. She doesn't have the glass of wine, so that's a good thing. So if it's a fun, if it's a playful thing, I don't see any harm. But if people become dependent of it, and if it, of course, exacerbates any existing not helpful behavioral patterns or areas in the psyche that do actually need support developing, yeah, it could
Yeah.
become a disaster as well. So that's, of course, where the ethical implications come in again. And how can companies who develop these technologies be guided? Or maybe they need more than guidance. Maybe it needs regulations, because if making a lot of money is at the end of the equation, people may not do the right thing. So how can this be regulated?
Yeah, this is something where I think whenever technology is new, I think there's often this tendency to panic and to assume the worst and to think that it's going to destroy us and our relationships. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety. At the end of the day, I think this is the future that we're moving towards. We're already there in a lot of ways. And so I think for some people, this is just going to be another type of relationship that we have. You have friendships, you have romantic relationships, you have AI relationships. And then for some people, they might take it to the extreme where it becomes a problem. For others, it's going to be something great that they do to pass the time, or it's just going to be another type of companion. And to your point about regulation and about corporate interests and all of this, that's something else that I think is really important to think about, because these relationships are, at the end of the day, they're being managed by a company that's motivated by profit. And so they can decide to make changes to the AI that you feel some kind of connection with. They can decide to discontinue something. That relationship is being entirely managed by someone else who's doing this for purposes that might not be consistent with helping someone have a healthy relationship. I think that part of it is very tricky. Is it going to be a situation where we do need regulation potentially? And again, these are things that I think we're still trying to sort out.
Yes, and of course, it's also a huge data play, and all the information that you share with, say, AI companions, you may actually bare your soul because you get and just immersed in this. Oh, I'm having this relationship. You feel really good. The AI is programmed to make you feel good and draw out more of a connection from your side. And whose hands does, or whose screens does this information actually end up? and how can it be used not just by that entity, but maybe this information, like when we were discussing genetic testing, can it get resold? When it does get resold, for what purpose? So it's just interesting. It's a lot of considerations that I think where the responsibility on the user side is also asked for to use this responsibly, especially as AI and algorithms are just evolving, continually evolving. That being said, Dr. Sharabi, what do you see happening in dating apps when we talk about the role of AI and also algorithms and the way they're evolving? Yeah.
So there are two ways that I think we can think about the role of AI in relationships. And one way we can think about it is in terms of AI companions and us forming relationships with AI. But also there's the potential for AI to facilitate relationships. And I think that's what we're seeing more of in the online dating space currently. There's a lot of talk about AI assistants that can help you, maybe coach you, guide you through the online dating process. But people are also using AI to help with their self-presentation, to make themselves look good to potential partners. So it's not so much about having a relationship with an AI as it is about using AI to help you more easily connect with another person. And right now, I think there are people that are experimenting with like ChatGPT as a way of writing messages to each other and as a way of helping to craft a profile. It's like, I don't know how to present myself. So maybe ChatGPT can give me some ideas. It's hard. Like I have mixed feelings about it, right? Because on the one hand, we're all using AI, we're using ChatGPT. Like I don't think you can prevent people from doing that. And maybe they learn something from it, right? I don't know how to maybe open my messages to people on a dating app and I'm getting some guidance from ChatGPT and maybe I'm learning from that and I'm getting better. But at the same time, one of the biggest concerns that I think people have when they're using dating apps is that they're afraid of being catfished and they're afraid of somebody being dishonest. If you now know that the people you're interacting with are using AI to help present themselves, then who do you trust? And so this is something that I think the platforms are currently trying to sort out as well. Like, to what extent are we going to integrate AI into this process? Are we going to try to prevent people from using it, which I think will be difficult? And it makes me wonder what this is going to mean for online dating. Is it going to mean that people meet more quickly, that everyone's just compelled to meet face to face because that's the only way to judge authenticity? I don't know, but I see it fundamentally changing the online dating experience, which is a space where there really hasn't been a lot of big innovation in about a decade or so, I would say, since we shifted to dating apps.
True. So hopefully it will change it to the better. But I hear what you're saying, Dr. Sharabi, and the fear of, can you trust it? Is it authentic? Is huge. I personally, I have been, in a relationship and married for it'll be 20 years now. So this whole dating app revolution bypassed me. I love living vicariously and hearing from my various male and female friends on how they are navigating that landscape, sometimes with amazing stories, sometimes with hilarious stories, sometimes with not so good stories. And of course, all of this is going to be vastly influenced by the technologies that we're just discussing. I do see a huge benefit, though, also with AI and algorithm coming in and refining it. If we think about the classic versions, let's just pick two that we were accustomed to decades ago, and how you meet a significant other. The one scenario is at a bar or at a party, or you get introduced by a circle of friends and family. Specifically, if you're out and about and you meet somebody and you may have a lot of chemistry with them, that's great. But that doesn't really, if you're looking for a longer term relationship, that's not a guarantee at all. The chemistry may fizzle out very quickly. And oftentimes when you get introduced by friends and family, they do know about you and about the other person, and they see that there might be great connecting points and the potential for a longer relationship, but then maybe the chemistry is lacking. So I do believe I have quite a few friends who have found their wives and husbands via dating apps, because you pretty much, as long as the other person is honest, there's compatibility that might ensure longevity of the relationship. And then potentially also chemistry, especially after the first meeting. That really can be a win-win.
Yeah, and what we have now is a situation where those third parties, so like friends, family members, people who used to help set us up with potential romantic partners, they're now being replaced by algorithms. So algorithms are essentially automating the tasks that were once performed by human matchmakers. And so there are definitely differences when you talk about having an algorithm or an AI try to judge your compatibility with another person versus having a human who knows you well trying to do it. And I think this is another place where AI has the potential to really transform dating apps. Right now, I think it's fair to say that no platform has figured out the secret to compatibility. If they had, then everyone would use that one and no other dating app would exist. But I think as AI gets better, hopefully we'll get a little bit closer. At least the recommendations will get better. And sure, there are a lot of people who have tremendous success using dating apps. They meet someone, they get married, they really have a lot of luck with it. And then there are people that have been on the app since they first existed. There are people who've been on Tinder from the very beginning who haven't been able to find what they're looking for. And so to me, this matchmaking process, this is another place where AI could end up being really helpful.
For sure. And talking about marriages and how quite a significant portion of marriages are now beginning online, you have looked into the comparative success of online and offline initiated marriages. And so, what factors do you believe contribute to a higher satisfaction rate in marriages that start online?
Yeah. So this is really interesting because there was a study that was done about 10 or so years ago that compared couples who met online and then later got married to people who were meeting in person. They found that if you met online, you tended to be a little bit more satisfied and a little bit more stable in your marriage, which says great things about meeting through the internet. But this was done before dating apps really got popular. So you're talking about traditional online dating sites that had a very different sort of matchmaking process, even different types of users who were using like those desktop versions versus swiping on apps. So recently, we looked at this again, my colleague and I at Michigan State University, Elizabeth Dorrance Hall, and I did a comparison of couples who were meeting through online dating versus in person. And we found that there was an effect, but it was the opposite of what was found 10 years ago. So now people who are meeting online through online dating are a little bit less satisfied, a little bit less stable. And so you say, okay, what's changed, right? What's different now? And I think one of the big things is dating apps. Like dating apps have really pushed online dating into the mainstream, especially with young people who weren't so much on the sites that are now one of the biggest demographics for the apps. They've changed the matchmaking process. So much of online dating is different now because of dating apps. And so I'm always really careful when I talk about these findings because these aren't huge effects. So not saying if you met your significant other through a dating app that your marriage is doomed or anything like that. But there is something going on there and there is a difference. And so I think it's worth really considering what might be driving that.
Yes. And what also is interesting, so the one thing is like us looking at our culture and how are the qualities of the relationships differently affected if we met online versus in real life. I'm also fascinated by the different cultural nuances and, how technology, given the global reach of these platforms, has an effect on that. What's your take on cross-cultural dynamics of these technologies?
So this is a really great question because if you look at where online dating tends to be the most popular, it's typically in Western societies. It's really popular in the US, in Europe. And these platforms tend to not do so well in cultural contexts where people are really used to relying on their networks to meet partners. They're really used to tapping into friends and family, and online dating is by design introducing you to strangers. And so if that is inconsistent with cultural norms for you, then it's going to be really hard to get past the stigma of using online dating because people are going to expect you to be meeting through your social network. And so you even see that having a role, like here in the US, in research that I've done looking at people who are in long-term relationships from online dating. One thing that I've heard from them is that they sometimes struggle with just getting the network support that we know you need to maintain a relationship. Like sometimes their friends and family are really judgmental. They don't understand online dating. They don't understand what they were doing on an app that maybe has a reputation as being more hookup oriented. And they also don't know the partner because it's a stranger. So it's not like it's somebody who you went to high school with, who your family already knows, or someone, you met through work and they're already integrated with your colleagues and, they're part of your network. So sometimes it can be hard to get that kind of acceptance. So now think about that in terms of cultures where it's expected that your family is going to play a role in setting you up with somebody. I think in those situations, it's hard to make the case for online dating. And that's something that I think is definitely worth noting.
Yes, and thank you for giving us that perspective, Dr. Sharabi, because we certainly still have these trepidations or biases here, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
I've experienced that in my circle of friends as well. You're involved in some quite fascinating studies. We talked about the VR dates. Can you share some more about the work and the studies you're currently conducting?
Yeah. So one of the recent studies that we did with virtual reality was comparing the process of initiating a relationship with someone in VR versus face to face. So we brought people into the lab, we set them up on blind dates, and we assigned them to conditions. So some people were interacting in VR. They were able to choose and customize their avatar. They met somebody for the first time with a headset on, and other people were meeting face to face. And so we're looking at the process of how they get to know each other in that environment compared to a more traditional environment. Another study we're doing right now, also with virtual reality, is bringing couples in established relationships into the Dreamscape VR pods, these really beautiful VR pods that we have on the Arizona State University campus. We're bringing them into the pods for a date night in VR, and we're looking at how they experience social touch in virtual reality. And so this is going back to the idea that VR engages the senses and it makes it possible to experience touch with someone. You can see your avatar reaching out and touching another person's avatar. And then in the case of our study, you can also feel that happening in real time because they are in the same space. And so looking at how that changes the experience of loneliness, of things like their perceptions towards the relationship. And so that's something else that we are currently looking at.
Hmm. And what you said a little while ago, Dr. Sharabi, about that, your take is that people will just have different types of relationships, and including maybe on top of the real life relationship, you'll have a relationship with somebody just virtually, or you'll have a relationship with somebody, whether it's romantic or platonic, but a loving relationship with an AI companion. And I can't help but to think about if we look, for example, at the crisis in having enough caretakers, particularly for the elderly. I'm experiencing it in Germany via family and friends. I'm hearing about it here in the US. Obviously, having a physical person in your life that keeps you company is preferable for most. However, if we look at countries like Japan that are already integrating robot companions for, let's say, in nursing homes, and the profoundly positive effects this has actually on the individuals interacting with those companions, I think it is a part, not the only tool, but a tool for a bigger, brighter future for us also, especially with some of the issues we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that there are certain populations that are really going to stand to benefit a lot from AI, from virtual reality. People who aren't able to connect in person for whatever reason, whether that's because of physical distance, whether that's for other reasons that they might not be able to. I think that's where the technology could be really beneficial. And that's in addition to incorporating it in situations where we're just looking at people going about their day-to-day experiences of trying to initiate or maintain a relationship. And so I think across the board, to me, this is the future that we're heading towards, but there are also certain groups that stand to benefit from it even more. And so I think you bring up one good example. And there's also generational differences in all of this too. This has become really noticeable to me as someone who spends a lot of time with college students. And so something that's been really striking to me, I've had conversations with people in their early 20s that are in long-term relationships who have told me that they've all been initiated online. That's how they're meeting people, right? And then with these college students who were oftentimes using for VR studies, they're using VR, maybe not socializing it in it. They have access to the technology, or a lot of them do. That's a very different experience compared to somebody who's maybe coming to this a little bit later in life, where the technology is unfamiliar, where they're used to connecting in person, and now there's this shift happening. And so I think that we often look at young people as a sign of where we're headed because they are the early adopters, but the generational differences, I think, are also an important component of all of this.
For sure. And I also just imagine that somebody who has just grown up or grown into this, where technology is also a part of your dating life, of building friendships and relationships, there is, it's probably not the correct word to use, but there is a certain literacy of, you get a feel for, is something okay? Can I safely, or is it worthwhile to actually meet up with this person in real life too? Similar to how I and my contemporaries have developed this radar when you meet somebody out in the quote wild. Is this somebody that you want to see on another occasion, maybe go into a more intimate setting where there's not dozens of bystanders by? I think it probably also, you hone your capacity to distill whether this is something worthwhile pursuing or not.
Right. And this is also for young people, this is the technology that has existed for the entire time that they've been out there dating and forming relationships. We now have some of the first generations that have always been in an environment where, say, like dating apps have been an option. It's going to be the same way with AI, it's going to be the same way with VR. Where to them, this is just going to be a part of relationships, and they're not going to have that point of comparison. And it's funny because something I'm hearing from young people now is that they're like nostalgic for meeting face to face because the technology is what they're used to. So that's not the novel thing, it's the face to face that's novel when it comes to meeting people. And I think that's also a sign of just how much things have changed. But yeah, I think that we're going to get to the point with some of these emerging technologies as well, where it's going to be routine for the people who are growing up with them now.
And as far as the experience, of course, the students you work with, how is it in your circle with your contemporaries? How is the perception, the openness, or maybe closedness towards these technologies and the new ways that human beings can now connect with each other?
Yeah, I'm a millennial. And so a lot of my friends have met significant others through online dating. A lot of them are using AI, they're using VR. And so I think that it's a little bit different because there is that point of comparison. Like we also remember a time when these technologies weren't as popular. And so I think that part makes it a little bit different. And it's always funny to me too, because it seems like something like online dating, for example, is so commonplace now. But there is still sometimes a stigma. And this is also something that I've shown in the work that I've done, some of the research that I've been doing, where it's not so much about, oh, you met a partner through technology or you met a partner online. It's more, what platform were you using? How did you meet exactly? Was it something that has a reputation as being more of a hookup app, or what kind of environment were you in exactly? And so I still encounter people, and I've still had participants tell me that they're reluctant to tell certain people in their network how they met their partner, even though we're all doing it, right? But they still feel some hesitancy. And in that sense as well, I think we have a ways to go, like in terms of increasing the acceptability of all of this, which is why these conversations are so important too. I think for making people feel comfortable about the connections that they're forming through technologies that maybe people aren't as familiar with or don't have as much experience with.
For sure. And lastly, if you, I just need to ask that question for those of my friends and in the audience who are very much immersed in the dating apps world, there's also something you can get dating app burnout, right? It's something I have a lot of my friends experiencing, but it's not that widely discussed yet. What are some strategies people can use to keep dating apps enjoyable without falling into this dating app burnout?
Yeah, burnout is a big problem right now. And I think that a lot of it's about the quantity versus quality aspect of online dating. Like one thing that dating apps do really well is increase your access to potential partners. So there's a lot of quantity, but sometimes finding a quality partner can be more difficult. And so I think people are spending a whole lot of time swiping and not necessarily finding the person that they're looking for. And that's leading them to get really frustrated and tired and ultimately burnt out with the process. I think it's always helpful when you diversify the ways that you're meeting people. So, not putting everything into online dating to where you're closing yourself off to other opportunities that you might have to meet someone. And this is something else I've had people tell me, like, you get really comfortable using dating apps. It takes some of the rejection out of dating. And so it can be uncomfortable then to go approach somebody in person because you think in your mind, okay, I could just swipe and I could just see if I find them that way because I feel weird going up to this person and talking to them. But sometimes connecting that way can take some of the pressure off, I think. So you don't feel like you have to find somebody through online dating and that is your only option because it's not, right? And I also think limiting the amount of time that you're spending swiping is really helpful. I think that it can be tempting to spend a lot of time going through profiles because you're really motivated and you know what you're looking for and you want to find that perfect partner. But spending so much time doing that ultimately can contribute to burnout and all the faces start to blur together and you're now losing sight of what you're looking for. And we know that people experience choice overload. They get cognitively overwhelmed in those kinds of situations. So I think limits are also really helpful.
Absolutely. As far as I understand, talking to neuroscientists, is that we actually have a certain amount of decisions that we can make, our brain can make, where it's still comfortable, and then it just gets worn out. Decision fatigue is real. So I can just imagine the constant decision making. If you spend hours and hours in a dating app, that will literally tire your brain out and be a cause for anxiety and feeling exhausted. Another thing that comes, Mhm, please.
Oh, I was just going to say that when you think about how many people you used to meet throughout a lifetime of dating before the apps, it's like you would only come across so many people that you might be interested in having a conversation with and dating versus now you could come across that many people just in one session of swiping. People have conversations with potentially hundreds of people before they actually find someone that they really click with. And so we're definitely not used to having so many options. And that is a key part of this burnout conversation, I think.
Yes, and another thing that comes to mind is when we have so many options, obviously, if there are red flags, like somebody is condescending to wait staff or subtly insults you, or there's just things that show that this is really not a great, nice, good person. There's some deeper rooted issues there. Those are red flags. Would be like, yes, let's not see this person again. But then there's also things like we all have our little idiosyncrasies and things we could work on and grow. And that's also a beautiful part of a partnership where you can grow together, where you bring out the best version of yourselves. Oftentimes that can be, sometimes it's not that pleasant, but you move through it and then wow, you come out the better for it. And I feel that oftentimes when we have so many options that we may choose to not even go and do the work together and potentially lose out on relationships that could flourish really beautifully.
Yeah. And I think it requires a certain shift in mindset, right? I think a lot of people go into it thinking, okay, if I swipe long enough, I'm going to find the perfect partner. The perfect partner is out there for me. I just have to find them versus thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to find someone and then I'm going to work at building a relationship to make them my perfect partner. That's the difference.
Mhm.
And I think if you're spending all your time looking for the perfect person, you're going to struggle. That's really tough. I think that's the type of attitude that does lead to burnout. It leads to frustration and people not living up to expectations. I think that a healthier attitude towards the process is thinking, okay, I'm going to find somebody who I really enjoy spending time with, who, I could see a future with, and then I'm going to put in the work to make this the relationship that I want. One of the studies that we're doing, we're looking at touch in virtual reality. And so we're bringing couples into the Dreamscape VR pods that they built on the Arizona State University campus, these really cool VR pods that provide a fully immersive experience. And we're having them go through that together. And we're looking at how they experience different types of social touch as they're moving through the VR. And so VR introduces all of these different possibilities for how we can physically connect with each other. You can have the experience of touching somebody without any sort of visual element. So you can't see it happening, you can only feel it. You can also have a situation where you reach out for somebody and there's not a physical connection. You can interact with AI. And there are all of these different ways that touch can happen. And so that's something that we are looking at in that project.
Yes, beautiful. Dr. Sharabi, it was really great talking to you. I learned a lot here. And for people who want to learn even more about your work or connect with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, so they can check out my blog, Dating in the Digital Age for Psychology Today. And they can also check out our lab's website. I direct the Relationships and Technology Lab at Arizona State University.
Excellent. I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes. Dr. Sharabi, what a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on.